My mother rolled her eyes the second I walked into that courtroom. Not a subtle eye roll either, the kind that screams, "Here we go again," like I'm the inconvenience in her perfectly crafted victim narrative. But then something shifted. Judge Alastair Finch froze. His eyes went from the paperwork on his bench to my face, and I watched recognition hit him like a freight train. "Wait," he said slowly, setting down his pen. "These allegations are against you." My parents had no idea who I really was, and honestly, that was the best part. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt invisible to your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. To understand that moment, we have to go back 3 months. My mentor died, Arthur Vance, the legendary architect, the man who didn't just design buildings, he designed futures. And he was the man who actually raised me while my parents were off living their best lives, pretending I didn't exist. His funeral was massive. Every architect, developer, and politician in the state showed up. I delivered the eulogy. My parents, Isabel and Rick, sat in the back row. They arrived late and left before the reception. Classic behavior. I hadn't seen them in over a decade, not since my 18th birthday when my grandmother passed, and they showed up for exactly 90 minutes before disappearing again. After Grandma Alina died, it was just Arthur and me. He was 73 then, still sharp, still sketching on napkins, still making sure I had every opportunity he could provide. He was my grandfather, but he was more than that. He was my true north. Here's the thing about my parents. My mother, Isabel, got pregnant at 18. She decided motherhood cramped her social climbing style. My father, Rick, was a promising hockey player with dreams of going pro. A baby didn't fit their aesthetic, so they did what selfish people do. They dropped me at my grandparents' house when I was 3 months old and basically vanished. Oh, they'd visit twice a year if the stars aligned. Christmas and maybe my birthday. Isabel would show up in designer clothes that smelled like expensive perfume, kiss the air near my cheek, and spend her entire visit critiquing how my grandmother was raising me. Too soft, apparently. Meanwhile, Rick avoided these visits entirely, especially after Arthur called him out for being a deadbeat. So I watched my father on TV instead. Every time his minor league team played, Arthur had the game on. Not because he cared about hockey, but because he wanted me to know my father existed somewhere, even if he chose not to exist in my life. But I never felt like I was missing anything. Grandma Alina and Arthur gave me everything, real love, the kind that shows up. They were at every school play, every science fair, every debate competition. They were my parents in every way that actually matters. Grandma taught me how to bake. I remember being 4 years old, standing on a stool in her kitchen, making chocolate chip cookies. She let me pour in way too many chocolate chips, never getting frustrated, just laughing and saying the best cookies had extra love and extra chocolate. Arthur would come home from his firm, still in his crisp suit, scoop me up, flour in my hair and all, and ask about my day like I was the most fascinating person alive. I'd tell him about the Lego tower I built or the picture I drew, and he'd listen like I was presenting a design to a client. They never badmouthed my parents to me. When I'd ask why Mommy and Daddy didn't live with us, Grandma would just say, "They're busy with important things, sweetie." And I believed her. Kids believe what they're told when the people telling them are kind. But I wasn't stupid. I noticed things. I noticed how other kids' parents showed up to parent-teacher conferences, how friends talked about family vacations while my biggest trip was going with Arthur to one of his construction sites, how the birthday cards from Isabel and Rick would arrive weeks late, with messages so generic they could have been written to anyone. The first time I really understood something was wrong, I was 7. I had a small solo in the school Christmas concert, practiced for weeks. Grandma and Arthur sat in the front row, Arthur with his old video camera, Grandma holding a bouquet of flowers from her garden. Afterward, I saw my friend with both his parents, taking photos, hugging him. I looked at my grandparents and asked why my mommy and daddy didn't come. Grandma's face did this thing where she tried to smile, but her eyes were sad. They wanted to, sweetheart, they just couldn't make it this time. But I'd heard her on the phone the week before, a one-sided conversation with Isabel about the concert. The long silences, the pained look on her face, the mention of Rick's team holiday party. I learned to stop asking after that. Arthur taught me chess when I was 8. We spend Sunday afternoons at the board, him explaining strategy, teaching me to think 3 moves ahead. He never let me win. It annoyed me at first, but when I finally beat him legitimately at 12, he was so proud he called his business partner to brag. Grandma taught me gardening. She showed me how patience and consistent care could create beautiful things. I didn't realize until I was much older that she wasn't teaching me about plants. She was teaching me about life. They cheered louder than any other parents at my soccer games. I used to be embarrassed by their enthusiasm. Now, I'd give anything to hear Arthur's steady voice yelling from the sidelines one more time. When Grandma died suddenly from a stroke, I was 18, about to start my first year of architecture school. I thought my world had ended. The woman who raised me was just gone. Arthur carried both of us through that grief. And somewhere in that darkness, he started really talking to me about his work, about design, about integrity, about using influence responsibly. A building reflects the character of its architect, Leo, he'd say. It can be honest or deceptive, strong or weak. Make sure your work and your life have integrity. That's when I decided I wouldn't just be an architect, I would be an architect like him. I graduated at the top of my class. Arthur was there, beaming. My parents sent a card. He used his considerable influence to help me land a position at the most prestigious firm in the city. I worked my way up fast. It turned out I was good at it. By 30, I was a junior partner, handling high-profile projects, complex designs that made magazine covers. My parents had no idea. They probably thought I was working some boring drafting job if they thought of me at all. Arthur retired when I was 27. Done my part, he said, but really he just wanted to spend time with me while he still could. Our Sunday dinners became sacred. He taught me everything about reading a client, about negotiating contracts, about maintaining your vision when everyone around you wants to compromise. When he died at 87, peacefully in his sleep, I felt that familiar emptiness return. But this time, I wasn't a lost 18-year-old. I was 32, and I had become exactly who he raised me to be, a man built on a foundation of integrity he had laid. The will reading is next, and my parents' reaction is exactly what you'd expect. But stick around, because the moment the judge recognizes me in that courtroom is when their entire plan falls apart. The will reading happened a week later. I expected maybe some books, his watch, his collection of fountain pens. What I got was everything. The firm, the house, the investment portfolio, the life insurance, $10 million. Everything he had spent decades building he left to me, and with it there was a sealed letter. His attorney handed it to me. My hands shook as I opened it. "My dearest Leo," it began, "you are reading this because I am gone, but my pride in you is eternal. I leave you all that I have built not out of obligation, but because you earned it. You earned it through every moment you chose to be by my side, through the integrity you show in your work, and through the love you gave so freely when others could not be bothered. Isabel and Rick made their choices long ago. This is mine. Be strong, my boy." I cried reading that, not sad tears, validation tears. Then the attorney handed me another envelope. "Arthur anticipated they might contest this," he said. "He wanted you to be armed with the truth." Inside was an arsenal, meticulously organized. First, the financial records. Bank statements showing Arthur had given Isabel $3,000 a month, every single month, starting when I was a baby and continuing for over 20 years. More than $800,000 in total. Then the communications. Emails from her asking for more. Texts promising to visit and then canceling at the last minute. Printed out letters from Rick asking for money for a series of failed business ventures, a sports bar, a coaching clinic, a memorabilia shop. It was a paper trail of their neglect and their greed. And finally, the most heartbreaking part, a bundle of letters tied with twine, in Arthur's elegant script, all addressed to Isabel but marked unsent. They were a diary of his disappointment, a chronicle of every missed recital, every broken promise, every time he had to watch me search the crowd for a face that was never there. He had been preparing for this fight for years. He knew them better than I ever could. Exactly 30 days later, my attorney called. Isabel and Rick had filed a lawsuit. The claim, undue influence. Their story: I had manipulated a vulnerable, grieving old man. I had isolated him from his loving family and coerced him into changing his will. They claimed they deserved their rightful share as his only child and her husband. I actually laughed. I was in the middle of reviewing the structural plans for a new skyscraper when I got the message. The irony. They assumed I was still that abandoned 7-year-old, that I'd be easy to intimidate. They had no idea I'd spent the last decade in boardrooms, negotiating with cutthroat developers and staring down powerful city officials. They had no idea their own father had prepared me for this exact moment. And they definitely had no idea who Judge Alastair Finch was. Which brings us back to that courtroom. That moment of recognition. Judge Finch had been Arthur's protege 25 years ago, before he became a judge himself. He had been at our house for Sunday dinners. He had attended my college graduation. He knew exactly who I was. He knew my reputation in the city as a partner at Arthur's firm. He knew what Arthur meant to me. And he knew firsthand that the people suing me were the same people who couldn't be bothered to show up for anything. My mother's attorney stood up. A man named Richard Palmer, who specialized in exploiting emotional arguments when the facts weren't on his side. Judge Finch looked at both parties. "Before we proceed," he said, his voice calm and authoritative, "I need to disclose that I had a close professional and personal relationship with the late Mr. Arthur Vance. If either party objects to me hearing this case, you must speak now." I watched Palmer whisper frantically with my parents. Isabel looked nervous. Rick just looked annoyed, like he was missing a tea time. Finally, Palmer stood. "No objection, Your Honor." "Big mistake." "Then let's proceed, Mr. Palmer," Judge Finch said. "Your opening statement." Palmer's opening statement was a work of art, if you appreciate fiction. He painted Isabel as this devoted daughter, cruelly separated from her loving father by manipulative grandparents who poisoned the relationship from the start. He described me as calculating, someone who isolated an elderly man, still reeling from the grief of losing his wife, and positioned myself as his sole caregiver purely to secure an inheritance. Arthur Vance was vulnerable, Palmer argued, his voice dripping with synthetic sympathy. Depressed and lonely. The defendant, Leo Maxwell, exploited that vulnerability. This will does not reflect Mr. Vance's true wishes. It reflects a calculated campaign to inherit a fortune. I kept my face neutral, a mask of calm professionalism. Inside, I was cataloging every lie, every distortion, every single thread I was about to pull until his entire narrative unraveled. The plaintiff calls Isabel Maxwell to the stand. My mother stood, smoothing her conservative black dress. She had dressed for the part, grieving daughter. Minimal makeup, hair pulled back, almost convincing if you didn't know better. Palmer approached her gently. "Mrs. Maxwell, please describe your relationship with your father." Isabel's voice wavered, a perfect performance. "He was my hero, my everything." She dabbed at an eye with a tissue she'd clearly brought for this exact moment. "And when you had Leo, what was your father's involvement?" "Oh, he was so excited to be a grandfather," she said, her voice cracking. "I was so young, just 18, still trying to figure out my life. When he and my mother offered to watch Leo while Rick and I got established, I thought it was temporary. But it became permanent, Palmer prompted. Yes, she choked out. They kept him. They made it seem like Rick and I were bad parents for wanting careers. They turned my own son against me. My attorney, Thomas, glanced at me. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, let her dig the hole deeper. After your mother passed, Palmer continued, did your relationship with your father change? He withdrew, Isabel said. He became cold. He blamed me somehow for not being there enough. But I tried, I called, I visited when I could. He just pushed me away, and he held Leo closer and closer. Palmer finished. No further questions. Judge Finch looked at my attorney. Mr. Goldstein, your cross-examination. Thomas stood and approached my mother, his demeanor professional, direct, and utterly devoid of sympathy. Mrs. Maxwell, you were 18 when Leo was born, correct? Yes, and you voluntarily left him with your parents when he was 3 months old. Well, it wasn't that simple. A yes or no will suffice, Mrs. Maxwell. Yes. Thomas pulled out a large, bound document. Arthur's meticulously kept calendars. According to your father's records, you visited 4 times in Leo's first year of life. Is that accurate? Isabel's face flushed. I was dealing with a lot. I was young. I was trying to support Rick's career. Of course, Thomas said, his voice flat. Let's discuss that support. Your father gave you $3,000 a month, starting when Leo was an infant and continuing for over 2 decades. That's more than $800,000. What was that money used for? Palmer jumped up. Objection, relevance. The plaintiffs claim they deserve a share of the estate, Thomas countered smoothly. I am establishing the very significant share they have already received. This is highly relevant. Overruled, Judge Finch said, not even looking up from his notes. Answer the question, Mrs. Maxwell. She shifted uncomfortably. Living expenses, rent, normal things. In the last 10 years of your father's life, Mrs. Maxwell, Thomas continued, how many times did you see him in person? I don't know exactly, several times. Thomas pulled out another document. According to his calendar, which logged every meeting and appointment, it was 8 times, less than once a year. The courtroom was silent. And you call that a devoted relationship? I was busy. I have my own life. Isabel protested, her victim facade cracking. Your own life, Thomas echoed. When was the last time you saw your father before he died? A long, painful silence. I don't remember. It was his 84th birthday party, Thomas supplied. 3 years before his death. You stayed for 90 minutes and left before the cake was served. You did not see him again until his funeral. Is that correct? I think so, yes. Thomas let that hang in the air. One final question. You testified that your father pushed you away after your mother died. But isn't it true that you stopped visiting almost entirely right after he retired and informed you that while the monthly payments would continue, the extra funds for Rick's failed businesses would stop? Her face went pale. You visited exactly 0 times in the 3 years following that conversation. Is that true or false? She looked at her lawyer, then at the floor. She said nothing. No further questions, Thomas said quietly and returned to his seat. Rick took the stand next, looking even more out of place. He fidgeted in his suit like a teenager forced to attend church. His testimony was a mumbled, less convincing version of Isabel. He tried to be involved. Arthur made it difficult. He felt pushed out. Thomas's cross-examination was surgical. Mr. Miller, you said you wanted to be involved in Leo's life. Can you name a single school event you attended? A play, a soccer game, a parent-teacher conference? Silence. I was traveling a lot for hockey. Your hockey career ended when Leo was 8, Thomas stated. After that, you lived less than 2 hours away. How many times did you come inside Arthur Vance's house in the 24 years after your career ended? Rick's jaw tightened. That house was tense. The old man didn't like me. Why didn't he like you, Mr. Miller? I don't know, he was judgmental. Or perhaps, Thomas said, pulling out the stack of letters requesting money, he judged you for abandoning your son and then repeatedly asking him to bail you out of your financial failures. Thomas projected a photograph onto the large screen in the courtroom. It was from my graduation from architecture school. Me, beaming, with Arthur and Grandma Elena on either side. This is from Leo's graduation. Your son is graduating at the top of his class. There's his grandfather. There's his grandmother. Where are you, Mr. Miller? Rick stammered. I might have had a commitment. You didn't come, Thomas said, his voice cold as ice. You missed his high school graduation, his college graduation, every significant moment of his life. And now you sit here and claim you deserve half of the estate earned by the man who actually showed up. We're family, Rick blurted out, his face turning red. We deserve something. Family, Thomas said slowly. No further questions. The rest of their case crumbled. They brought in a psychiatrist who had never met Arthur to claim he was mentally incompetent, a theory Thomas dismantled in under 5 minutes. They called a distant cousin who said Arthur once wished Isabel visited more. Then it was our turn. Thomas called Judge Andrew Mitchell, a close friend of Arthur's who'd known him for 40 years. He called Arthur's estate attorney. He called Arthur's business partner. They all testified to the same thing. Arthur Vance was brilliant, sharp, and completely intentional until the very end. He was proud of me and had been clear for years that I was his rightful heir because I had earned it. Finally, Thomas had me take the stand. I told my truth, calmly, factually. I didn't need to be emotional. The facts were emotional enough. I detailed the missed birthdays, the broken promises, the financial dependence. I recounted how I moved home for 6 months after Grandma died to take care of Arthur, while my mother didn't check on him once. Palmer tried to rattle me on cross-examination. Weren't you just using him to advance your career? He sneered. I looked directly at him. My grandfather mentored me because he was proud of me and because watching me succeed gave him joy. That's not manipulation. That's what a father does. After the closing arguments, Judge Finch recessed for only 30 minutes. When he returned, the verdict was swift and brutal. The court finds that the will of Arthur Vance reflects his true and clear intentions, he declared. There is no evidence of undue influence or mental incompetence. The evidence shows a clear pattern of absence and financial taking by the plaintiffs, and a pattern of presence and devotion by the defendant. The petition is denied. The will stands as written. Isabel let out a sob. But Judge Finch wasn't finished. Furthermore, this court finds that this case was brought without merit, causing unnecessary expense and emotional distress. I am therefore awarding full attorney's fees to the defendant. The plaintiffs will bear all costs of this litigation. The gavel cracked down. It was over. As we gathered our things, my mother approached me, mascara streaking her face. "Leo, please," she begged. "Can we just talk?" I looked at her, really looked at her, for a moment. I almost felt pity. "There's nothing to talk about, Isabel." "I'm your mother," she said desperately, reaching for my arm. I stepped back out of her reach. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You're the woman who gave birth to me. My father was Arthur Vance. He earned that title every single day for 32 years. You just forfeited it." I turned and walked out of the courtroom. Behind me, I could hear her sobbing and Rick's angry voice telling her to pull herself together. I didn't look back. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free. In the years that followed, I took the helm of Arthur's firm. We didn't just design buildings. We built communities. I used a significant portion of the inheritance to establish the Vance Foundation, a nonprofit that provides scholarships for underprivileged architecture students, and funds community-focused design projects. Every year, I mentor a new generation of architects, teaching them what Arthur taught me. That integrity is the most important material you can build with. One day, about 5 years after the trial, I received a small package in the mail. Inside was a simple gold wedding band and a short, typed note from an attorney. Found this among Rick Miller's effects after he passed. Thought you might want it. It was my mother's. Rick was gone. I felt nothing. I put the ring in a drawer and never looked at it again. 10 years later, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Isabel. She was sick. She wanted to see me. She had regrets. I'm sure she does, I told the nurse who had called on her behalf. Regret is easy when you're out of time. Tell her I hope she finds peace, but I won't be a part of that process. Some might call that cold. I call it honest. She had 30 years to build a relationship with me. Her illness didn't erase that history. Last year, the city renamed the Institute of Architecture. It's now the Arthur Vance Center for Design and Innovation. They asked me to speak at the dedication. Standing at the podium, looking at his portrait hanging in the main hall, I told our story. Not the angry, bitter version, but the one about love and mentorship. Arthur Vance could have said no when my parents left me on his doorstep, I told the crowd. He was in his 50s at the peak of his career. Instead, he got a baby. He never complained. He just showed up every single day. He taught me that family isn't about biology, it's about who shows up. My grandfather's real legacy wasn't the money or the firm. His real legacy was the lesson he taught me, that love is a verb, that family is built, not born, and that showing up consistently is the greatest design you can ever create. Victory didn't feel like the explosion of joy I had imagined. It was quieter, a slow, deep exhale I hadn't realized I'd been holding for 32 years. Leaving the courthouse with Thomas patting my back and the city noise humming around us, I felt an immense, hollow lightness. The weight of their claims was gone, but in its place was the even heavier weight of Arthur's legacy. It was mine now. Not just the money or the firm, but the responsibility of his name, his principles. That evening I didn't go out to celebrate. I went to the house. My house. The rooms were silent, filled with the scent of old books and the lemon polish Grandma Alina used to use. I walked into Arthur's study, the heart of the home, where he had sketched masterpieces and taught me chess. His favorite leather chair sat by the fireplace, the imprint of his body still visible in the worn leather. I sat in it, the silence pressing in. The fight was over. I had defended him, defended his choice, defended our life together. But the wind felt solitary. He wasn't here to share it with. I couldn't call him and hear his calm, steady voice say, "Well done, my boy." I poured myself a small glass of the scotch he reserved for special occasions. The liquid burned, a sharp, clean fire. I looked at the framed photos on his desk. One of me, age 10, proudly holding up a Lego creation that vaguely resembled one of his buildings. Another of him and Grandma Alina on their wedding day, young and impossibly happy. There were no photos of Isabel or Rick, not out of spite, but simply because they were never here to be in them. The moral tension of it all settled in my gut. I had won against my own mother and father. I had exposed their greed, their neglect, their profound failure as parents in a public forum. There was a grim satisfaction in it, a sense of righteous justice. But underneath it, a sliver of something else resided, a deep, ancient sadness for the family that could have been, for the love that should have been as natural as breathing but was instead a transaction. They had forced this battle, but I was the one who had to land the final, decisive blow. Victory in a war you never wanted to fight is a complicated thing. Later that night, I drove to the cemetery. The air was cool and crisp. I sat on the grass between Arthur's and Alina's headstones, the city lights twinkling in the distance. "We won, Arthur," I said quietly, the words feeling inadequate. "Just like you knew we would. Your plan worked. They didn't stand a chance against the truth." I told him everything. About Judge Finch's recognition. About Isabel's practiced tears and Rick's bored indifference. About the moment Thomas presented the calendars, and the silence that filled the courtroom as decades of their absence were laid bare. "They had to pay for it all," I added, a small, bitter smile on my face. "You would have appreciated that bit of irony." But as I sat there, the wind rustling through the old oak trees, I knew the real payment wasn't the legal fees. The real price was the one they had paid every day for 30 years, the price of not knowing me, of not being there for the scraped knees, the school plays, the late-night talks about the future. They had traded a lifetime of fatherhood and motherhood for what? Money they didn't keep, careers that fizzled out, a life of superficiality. Their real punishment wasn't a judge's ruling, it was the emptiness of their own choices. And in that moment, sitting by his grave, I didn't feel anger toward them. I felt a profound, aching pity. A month after the trial, I began the somber task of truly sorting through Arthur's life. His attorney had managed the estate, but the personal effects, the pieces of his soul scattered throughout the house, were left for me. I started in his study, in the large mahogany desk where he'd signed contracts worth millions and written loving notes for my lunchbox. In the bottom drawer, tucked beneath old blueprints and tax documents, was a small, unassuming box made of cedar. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid, and the scent of old paper and dried ink filled the air. Inside, tied with a simple piece of twine, was the bundle of unsent letters, the arsenal of truth, as his attorney had called them. But holding them now, they felt less like an arsenal and more like a collection of wounds. I untied the twine and began to read. They weren't just a chronicle of my parents' neglect. They were a raw, unfiltered window into Arthur's heart. He was not just the stoic, principled architect I knew. He was a father, grappling with the immense pain of being unable to reach his only child. The first one was dated a week after my 7th birthday party, the one Isabel had promised to attend but never did. "Isabel," it began, his elegant script tighter than usual, "Leo waited for you by the window for 2 hours. He wore the sweater you sent him for Christmas even though it's too warm for it. Every time a car turned onto our street he would jump up, his face full of hope, a hope that I had to watch die over and over again. You didn't call. You didn't send a message. You simply didn't show up. I don't ask for much from you anymore, but I ask you this. Do not make promises to that boy that you do not intend to keep. His heart is not a toy for you to play with when you feel a fleeting pang of maternal guilt. Your absence is a fact he is learning to live with. Your broken promises are a cruelty he does not deserve." I read another, from when I was 16, after Rick had called asking for $20,000 to invest in another doomed business venture. "I am wiring the money as you asked," he wrote. "Not for Rick. I have no illusions about his business sense. I am doing it for you because you are my daughter and I cannot stand the thought of you struggling, but I need you to understand what this money costs. It costs me the respect I once had for the man you married. It costs me sleep, wondering if I am helping you or simply enabling a lifestyle of irresponsibility. And it costs Leo, though he would never say it. He sees it. He's 16 now and he understands everything. He sees you call for money, but never just to talk. He sees you treat his grandparents as a bank. What do you think that teaches him about family? About love? I fear you are showing him that it is all a transaction. I spend every day of my life trying to prove you wrong." Each letter was a new revelation. I saw his anger, his frustration, but most of all his sorrow. He loved Isabel. He was profoundly disappointed in the woman she had become, but he never stopped loving the little girl he had raised. The letters weren't written for a courtroom. They were written as a way for him to process his own grief, to make sense of the chasm that had opened between him and his daughter. The final letter was written just 6 months before he died. His handwriting was a little less steady, but the words were as clear as ever. "My dearest Isabel, I don't think I'll be writing any more of these. I've accepted things as they are. You have built a life for yourself, and it does not include your son or your father in any meaningful way. It hurts, but it is the truth. I want you to know that despite the distance, despite the years of disappointment, I have always loved you. I see so much of your mother in you, her fire, her beauty. I just wish I could have seen more of her heart. I am leaving everything to Leo. I know this will anger you. You will see it as a final rejection. It is not. It is a final acknowledgement of reality. He has been the son of my old age. He has filled this empty house with life and purpose. He has earned it not by blood but by presence. I hope one day you understand. I hope one day you find a peace that doesn't depend on money or status. I hope you find happiness. I will love you always, Dad. I folded the letters carefully and put them back in the box. My victory in court felt different now. It was no longer just about justice for me. It was about honoring the silent, private struggle of the man who had shouldered so much pain on my behalf. He had protected me from the depth of his own heartbreak. The moral tension tightened. My revenge was his justice, but it was built on a foundation of his profound, paternal sorrow. Life began to settle into a new, strange rhythm. I was the head of one of the city's most respected architectural firms, a position I was qualified for, yet felt I hadn't fully earned in the traditional sense. The weight of Arthur's name was both a shield and a burden. Every decision I made was measured against what he would have done. About 6 months after the trial, my assistant buzzed me. "There's a Mr. Henderson on the line for you. He says he knew your father." I frowned. "My father?" "Yes, Rick Miller." Curiosity piqued, I took the call. The voice on the other end was gruff, weathered. "Leo, it's Mark Henderson. I played with your dad back in the day, on the Bruins." "Okay," I said cautiously. "Listen, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, kid. I got a call this morning. Rick passed away, heart attack. It was quick, they said." I was silent. I felt nothing. A void. Not sadness, not relief, just a strange, clinical emptiness. He was a biological fact, a name on a birth certificate, a face on a television screen. His death felt as distant as he had been in life. "I see," I finally said. Henderson seemed to sense my detachment. "Look, I know things were complicated, but I just wanted to tell you one thing. Before your mom, before all the bad business deals, back when we were just kids on the ice, he was the best of us. The most talented. He could see plays before they happened. Everyone thought he was going to be a star. I don't know. I guess I just wanted someone to know that there was something good there once." "Thank you for telling me, Mr. Henderson," I said, the words feeling formal and hollow. "Sure, kid, take care of yourself." I hung up the phone and stared out my office window, which overlooked a skyline Arthur had helped create. Rick was dead. The man whose DNA I shared was gone, and all I felt was the quiet echo of a story that had ended long before he took his final breath. Henderson's call was an unexpected intrusion of humanity into the neat narrative I had built. My father wasn't just a villain, he was a failure. A man who peaked at 20 and spent the next 40 years chasing a ghost, sacrificing his own son in the process. It didn't excuse his actions, but it made them infinitesimally more tragic. The moral lines blurred just a little more. You can't exact revenge on a ghost. All you can do is refuse to be haunted by it. Rick's death, as emotionally distant as it was, served as a catalyst. Time was finite. Legacy was what you built while you had it. I threw myself into running the firm and, more importantly, establishing the Vance Foundation. This wasn't about charity galas and tax write-offs. It was about action. I personally reviewed every scholarship application. I sat on the board for every community project we funded, from a low-income housing development to a public park in a neglected neighborhood. I wanted Arthur's money to do what he did, build things with integrity that would last. One afternoon, I was interviewing the final candidates for the foundation's main scholarship, a full ride to the state's best architecture school. The last candidate was a young woman named Maya. Her portfolio was brilliant, innovative, and raw. Her application essay was even more compelling. She was raised by her grandmother after her parents, struggling with addiction, had left her behind. As she sat across from me, nervously clutching her portfolio, I saw a reflection of myself. The same hunger to prove herself, the same quiet weight of a difficult childhood. "Your work shows incredible spatial awareness," I said, pointing to one of her designs. "But this transition here is a little abrupt. What were you trying to achieve?" We spent an hour talking, not about her grades or her tragic backstory, but about design, about light and shadow, form and function. I saw the spark in her eyes, the same one Arthur must have seen in mine. She got the scholarship, but I gave her something more. "My office door is always open to you," I told her when I called to give her the news. "Anytime you need advice, a critique, or just someone to talk to who gets it, call me." She became my first real mentee. I would meet with her once a month, reviewing her school projects, offering advice, sharing stories about Arthur. In teaching her, I was relearning the lessons he had taught me. I saw how he had patiently nurtured my talent, how he had given me confidence when I had none. In becoming a mentor, I was finally stepping out of his shadow and standing beside him. I was no longer just the heir to his legacy. I was an active architect of it. The revenge was no longer about the past. It was about building a better future, one student, one building, one community at a time. It was the only revenge Arthur would have approved of. Years passed. The firm flourished under my leadership, earning a reputation for sustainable, human-centric design. The Vance Foundation became a major force for good in the city. I was no longer Arthur Vance's grandson. I was Leo Maxwell, an architect in my own right. The ghost of my parents had faded, becoming a footnote in a life defined by work, mentorship, and the quiet satisfaction of purpose. Then, 10 years after the trial, a letter arrived at my office. It was handwritten on plain paper. The return addressed simply a room number at a local hospice. "Dear Mr. Maxwell," it read, "I am a nurse at St. Jude's Hospice. I am writing on behalf of a patient, Isabel Miller. She is in the final stages of congestive heart failure. She has been asking for you. She is often confused, but your name is the one she repeats. I don't know the history between you, but I felt I had a moral obligation to reach out. If you wish to visit, she does not have much time." I read the letter 3 times. My first instinct was a cold, hard no. Why should I? What was there to say? She had made her choices, and I had built a life in defiance of them. Showing up now felt like a betrayal of every boundary I had fought to establish. It felt like a betrayal of Arthur and Alina, who had been there when she wasn't. I left the office early and went for a long walk through the park the foundation had funded. I watched children playing on the swings, families having picnics. This was the world I had helped build, a world of presence, of connection. What would Arthur do? The question echoed in my mind. He would not be guided by anger or resentment. He would be guided by integrity and a quiet, complicated sense of duty. He had loved her, even at her worst. His unsent letters were proof of that. Going to see her wouldn't be for her. It couldn't be. There was no relationship to salvage, no deathbed reconciliation that could magically erase 30 years of neglect. If I went, it would have to be for me, to close the final chapter, to stand at the end of that long, painful story and not flinch, to prove to myself that her hold on me was truly gone, that I could face her without the anger and pain she once inspired. It was the final moral test. Could I confront the source of my deepest wound, not to fight, but simply to witness its end? I went home and called the hospice. "I'll be there tomorrow," I said. The hospice was quiet, sterile, smelling of disinfectant and fatting life. The nurse led me to a small, private room. Isabel was propped up on pillows, a shadow of the glamorous, self-assured woman I remembered. She was frail, her skin pale and thin, an oxygen tube in her nose. Her eyes, once sharp and critical, were clouded with medication and fatigue. She stirred as I entered, her gaze slowly focusing on me. For a moment there was no recognition. Then a flicker. "Leo," her voice was a dry whisper. I stood by the door, not moving closer. "Isabel." We sat in silence for a long time. The only sound was the gentle hiss of the oxygen machine. What do you say to the woman who abandoned you, sued you, and was now dying in front of you. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy with the weight of everything unsaid, everything that could never be repaired. "You look good," she finally rasped. "Successful." "I am," I said. It wasn't a boast, just a fact. She tried to shift, a grimace of pain crossing her face. "Rick's gone." "I know." Another long silence. I could see her struggling to form words, to push past the fog of her illness. "Your grandfather," she whispered, her eyes drifting toward the window. "He was a better father to you than he ever was to me." The words stunned me. I had expected excuses, accusations, maybe even a last-ditch plea for forgiveness. I had not expected a confession. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice quiet. "After my mother died," she said, her breathing shallow, "he poured everything he had into raising me, but he was a judge, an institution. He gave me everything I needed, but he didn't know how to just be a dad. When you came along with a leaner there, he got a second chance. He was different with you, softer, he adored you." She paused, taking a ragged breath. "I was jealous, so jealous. It was ugly. I hated that he looked at you with a love he never seemed to have for me." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an excuse. But it was a reason. A flawed, selfish, deeply human reason. For the first time, I saw her not as a monster, but as a broken person, trapped in a cycle of her own resentment, unable to escape the shadow of a man she felt she could never please. "He loved you, Isabel," I said, and the words were true. I thought of the unsent letters. "He was just heartbroken by your choices." A single tear traced a path down her wrinkled cheek. "I made so many mistakes." I didn't respond. I didn't say, "It's okay." I didn't offer absolution. It wasn't mine to give. Her mistakes were hers to carry. I just stood there, a silent witness to her final, quiet reckoning. I stayed for another 10 minutes, and then I stood to leave. "Leo," she whispered as I reached the door. I turned back. "Tell me one thing," she said, her eyes pleading. "Was it a good life with them?" I thought of the chess games, the smell of baking cookies, the weight of Arthur's hand on my shoulder, the unwavering certainty of their love. "Yes," I said, "it was the very best." I walked out of that room, out of the hospice, and into the bright, clear afternoon. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel anger. I felt quiet. The last ghost had been faced. The final chapter was closed. Her confession hadn't forgiven her, but it had, in a strange way, freed me. I finally understood, and in understanding I could finally, completely let go. Years later, I stood on the observation deck of the new Vance Tower, the tallest building in the city, a project I had personally overseen from the first sketch to the final rivet. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the skyline I knew as intimately as my own reflection. So many of those buildings were Arthur's. A handful were now mine. Our legacies were intertwined, written in steel and glass against the sky. My true revenge was never about the courtroom. It wasn't about winning the money or watching my parents fade into obscurity. The most profound revenge was this: living a good life. A life of purpose, of integrity, of creation. A life built on the unshakable foundation Arthur and Alina had laid for me. My phone buzzed. It was Maya, the first student the Vance Foundation ever sponsored. She was a partner at my firm now, one of the most brilliant architects of her generation. "The revised plans for the library are ready for your review, Leo," she said. "And don't forget, you promised my son you'd teach him how to play chess tonight." I smiled. "I'll be there. Tell him to be ready to lose." I hung up and looked back out at the city. My life was full. Full of work I loved, full of people I respected, full of a chosen family I had built for myself. I had honored the people who raised me not by hoarding what they left me, but by multiplying it, by passing on their values to a new generation. I took a cocktail napkin from the bar and pulled a familiar fountain pen from my pocket, Arthur's favorite one. As the last rays of sunlight painted the clouds in hues of orange and purple, I began to sketch. An idea for a new community center, a space for kids like me, kids like Maya, who needed a safe place to build their dreams. The cycle continued, but it had been redeemed. The broken blueprint of my birth had been redesigned into a life of strength, beauty, and enduring purpose. And in the quiet hum of the city below, I could almost hear Arthur Vance's gentle, steady voice. "Well done, my boy, well done." Setting boundaries, especially with family, is one of the hardest things in the world. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is to honor the people who truly loved you and let go of those who didn't know how. My inheritance wasn't the money. It was the freedom to live a life of principle, a life Arthur would be proud of. And that is worth more than any fortune. Arthur taught me that true family is about presence, not blood. Have you ever had to define family on your own terms? Share your story in the comments below. These conversations are so important. Thank you for being here today. For more stories about justice, integrity, and the power of the human spirit, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on.